look who I bumped into. It's amazing who you find. Hello. Jane.
This is such a treat. So lovely to see you again.
It's so lovely to have you here. Obviously, we've worked together now for a fair few years.
Yes, and we have.
But not everybody knows your story, or indeed who you are. And if they haven't, yes, then they've missed out on a treat. Because you are obviously very talented with your cross stitch, but more than that, you are an amazing person in your own right, and everybody should know about it. So
you're a sweetie. I'm glad you said that.
I tell the truth. So for those that have never met you before, you have not always cross stitched.
No.
You used to be
a ward sister.
Yes.
I was a nurse from 1966 to 1987.
And then you had
yes, I
children.
can't remember when it was. Then I had children. I retired to have my son James, who's actually 38, so it gives you a clue about the timeline here. And I discovered cross stitch completely by accident. So this part of what I want to tell you about today really was that it was an accident of fate. Then I discovered historical traditional cross stitch, and so on and so on. So it's all very exciting. So,
but with cross stitch, it's fair to say you found your passion.
Absolutely, I was
and
shown.
Your thing.
Yes, I was shown how to do it by a neighbour after we moved to the Cotswolds, and it was the most extraordinary. It was like a light bulb moment for me. I remembered many years later that I'd actually done something not dissimilar, because I had stained a jumper with coffee, and I found a squared off pattern, and I worked cross stitch on top of this stain.
Really?
Without knowing that it was anything.
Without knowing what you were doing?
I didn't know.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Giving it a name.
Yes. So what I do is anything that's counted. I learnt from a friend one afternoon when James was crawling about the floor in his little playgrow. And within 6 months, I'd started what was called the Inglestone collection then. So that was named after our house. And it was counted cross-stitch based on the Cotswolds, really. So I was quite good at houses.
Right.
Drawing houses.
And the Cotswold has a wealth of beautiful
the
chocolate
houses.
box houses.
Exactly. Yeah. So I used to work on things that I could do within my 1 day a week with the one car.
Right.
And as far as I could get there and back in the day with a child. So that was how big my circle of business was. Anyway, that's
I'm
really...
amazed you got anything. It's when you add in the and with the child.
Yes, and with the child, and bribes in the back.
Yes.
So, and pushing buggies with bags of kits on the back, and the buggies tipping over on the...
Done it.
Yes, awful, awful.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how it all started, and then as a result of that, I discovered the sampler.
Now you have a wealth of antique samplers in your collection, don't you?
I have a collection.
Absolutely gorgeous. And you brought one here.
Yes. So this is really to show you that the embroidery I do comes from the past. Really, it has long legs. There was embroidery on linen in the tombs, the pharaohs. You know.
Wow. Wow.
So and the other thing that I'm very keen on, the combination is counted embroidery. So that's anything that you can count from a chart.
Okay.
Plus working on real linen.
Right.
That's my thing. That's my feature. Now, there's nothing wrong with the other materials you can use, but my choice is to work on linen. And that's something I'm going to sort of show in a minute, really.
I think anyone that is used to seeing your style will know that you draw your inspiration from these antique samplers.
Yeah, from traditional colours and
always
ways.
have that
feel.
Beautiful, soft palette to them.
That's what I aim at, really.
And it's just so stunning and timeless.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I like about it, is that things that I do now, or even things that I did 15 years, 20 years ago, are still selling or coming out of books that I've written, and people are still working them because they haven't dated.
No.
Because they're a traditional feel, you know.
Absolutely beautiful.
So the Inglestone collection was then, and then in 1996, as a result of something that was said to me as at a show, I formed the Cross Stitch Guild.
Right.
Now, an organisation that shall remain nameless was at one of the big retail fairs, and a lady came onto my stand at the Inglestone collection in tears, and I said, "What is the matter?" And she said, "I've just been to the other place, and they've told me my cross stitch isn't real embroidery."
What?
And I was incandescent.
I can imagine.
You know,
How
I
dare
just
they?
thought, how dare they? Embroidery, look it up in the dictionary.
Yes.
you can embroider a story. You know, how dare they?
But also, you know, this is what someone was doing for love, for their
absolutely.
You can't belittle that.
You?
No, absolutely.
Anyway,
I'm with you.
I went home
and as well.
Yes, and I went home and rang my financial advisor and said, "How do I form a guild?" And he said, "I'll find out and ring you back." And that was March 1996. On the 16th of March 1996, the Cross Stitch Guild was formed. And it's gone from strength to strength. Now
all down to an upsetting experience.
Yes, I mean,
a bit of rage.
I thought about it a couple of times because I thought the guild could do with having something of its own rather than necessarily belonging to different. I just felt I'd thought about it before, but that was the point that made me go, right, actually, I'm going to try and do this. So the guild was formed in 1996, and now 3 years ago. I finished as managing director,
right.
And Andrew Thompson is now the managing director,
okay.
And she's running the business from Warrington.
Yes.
But of course, it's mail order and shows, and I'm the one that does the designing for her, which means I have the best of both worlds.
Well, this is the beautiful thing, because when you first started and your computer arrived,
yes,
to be set up to do your design work, because you do the designs, and a lot of them are done on computers.
Yes.
The deal was. The guy could have the computer, but he had to set it up.
And organise it
yes.
for me. I mean, I worked on graph paper with a rotary pen, with Tipex, for years and years and years.
There'd
I mean,
be
the
more
early
Tipex
charts
than anything else for me.
Absolutely, and lots of bits of paper stuck on to cover mistakes. I mean, looking back, they were dreadful. But of course, the digital age wasn't even here yet.
No, I know, but now it is.
Yes. So what's actually happened then is that I design on a computer. I don't scan things.
Okay.
Apart from the copyright laws I'd break, I prefer to draw.
Mm-hmm.
So I draw, and I mean this is just a little sample of a chart that I've drawn to make that.
Oh, I love these.
These little watt bows.
Watt bows.
Yes, so this is a little watt bow that is not a commercial kit as yet.
Aha.
It will be.
Aha.
But this is the little chart that I've drawn. So this is drawn on my computer.
Right.
And basically I draw the shapes on a piece of squared paper.
Mm-hmm.
Then I translate these into straight lines or diagonal lines.
Okay.
So that it's reproducible. And I'm going to show you how we do that in a minute. And there's various ways you can get a chart. This one is a colour and symbols.
Right.
And that one is, oh, she said spitting on her finger disgustingly. And then that one is a colour one. And then this one, which is actually generally the cross stitcher's favourite, this one is a black and white one.
Why is the black and white favourite? That really surprises me.
Well, publishers like coloured ones because you flick through a book and it looks beautiful.
Yes.
Stitchers want to look at the chart like you have here, and they want to see which colour's which.
Right.
Because if the colours are close together, if it's a coloured chart, often you can't tell which colours, light red, dark red, medium red, blah, blah, blah,
okay,
or light green,
sense.
dark green, etc.
Yeah.
The other thing is that lots of people like to colour in as they stitched. Now, you probably wouldn't necessarily need to do it on here, but I've stitched a little bit of this in a minute that I'll show you. And you could colour in the ones with the light pencil or highlighter pen. Now, obviously, if you work on a big stinker of a chart, you know, 4 pages of A3, then it's useful if the phone rings to be able to come back and find where you were.
Perfect, of course.
So colouring in as you go makes sense. Just to show you, this is coming from my cross-stitch programme, and these are the little books, and you'll see what I mean by the charts. This is the current little cross-stitch guild. So we do the guild does a magazine 5 times a year, and it goes out to its members. And you'll do better at this than I will. But this is a Dutch sample, and it goes back to what I was saying about tradition. My husband and I visited Holland on a number of occasions.
Yeah, you are well travelled, aren't you?
He is. Do you know, when I married him, it was on the understanding he didn't have to have a passport. You wouldn't believe the places we'd been since then.
Yes, you go everywhere.
So this picture here, it goes to show you this was designed in the last 3 months.
Wow.
From little motifs that I saw when I went to visit a beautiful sampler shop in Amsterdam, and bought a sampler, of course.
Well, of
sadly.
course. Of course.
But these are little cross-stitch patterns, and it's incredibly, well, it's addictive, as people who do it know. You know, you can't just put it down.
No.
Because you've got to keep going.
But luckily you can take it everywhere with you because it's portable.
Absolutely. And interesting, this is just to prove again, if I can just go back one, bear with me. This is brand new, and in fact the members haven't seen this yet.
Oh wow, okay.
At this point, preview. So it's a sneaky preview.
So there's some hardhanger in there as well.
So yes, so that's to prove that we do anything that's counted.
Right.
And
Perfect.
I've got some more samples to show you. There's another little magazine here. Obviously, there's seasonal elements.
Lovely.
And then there's traditional samplers. This is, as a result, let me just get that one in the right angle for you. This little one was done when I was out in Italy.
Beautiful.
And it's a sampler from Assisi.
Lovely. Really gorgeous. So, Jane, today you're going to show us how to do the cross stitch itself.
I'm
going to do that.
Show you the fabrics, show you how to stitch.
You're also going to tell us how to keep in touch with you.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
But you've also got a prize draw.
Yes, we have.
So
I'm going to tell you that at the end.
Oh, okay.
It's a little surprise for you. I think you'll like it. I think you'll like it. It's from the Cross Stitch Guild, and I'll tell it now. Actually,
okay.
Yes.
Go on then.
If you can join this, it's a free draw. If you go onto the Cross Stitch Guild website, which you can see behind me, it's very easy. If you write my name or the Cross Stitch Guild into Google, you will get us.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he was called Greenoff, wasn't it? Because you either get me or my son, a photographer,
right.
when you put Greenoff in. Anyway,
Yes.
go to the Guild website, and there's a little place where you can register for the newsletter.
Okay.
Now, the newsletter's not these little books. These come out to members only.
Right.
But once a month, Andrew sends out a really smashing coloured newsletter by email, which anybody can receive. If you're already a subscriber to the newsletter, you will be in the draw automatically.
Oh, fabulous.
So we're not missing anybody out. But if you'd like to get in, the prize is £100 of e-vouchers.
Wow.
To shop with on the internet, on the website.
Fantastic.
The draw is going to be at my house on the 9th of March. When we are doing another day's photography for the Guild magazine.
Fabulous.
So we'll do a draw, and somebody will get a prize.
Well, that's fantastic.
And obviously, once you've seen the newsletter, if you don't want to do it anymore, you just unsubscribe. You know how they work these days. It's all terribly
But at least
clever.
it's a way of keeping in touch.
It's a lovely way of keeping in touch. And the other aspect I should mention is that as a result of some changes that are going on, my husband has finally agreed to let me have my own little site.
Okay.
It's quite different from the Guild. It'll be, we're calling it JaneGreenoff.com, author, teacher and finder of treasures.
I think that sums
Don't you think finding of treasures?
Finder of treasures.
I think the Indian trip might be a shopping trip.
Creator of
and
treasures
make little things,
as well.
yes. So there'll be lots of one-offs to buy, little bits and bobs, lots of stories, lots of reading. And that should be live in early March. That's with the luck of the wind behind us.
Fabulous.
But I've now turned the Indian trip into a buying trip, of course. What fun.
That sounds amazing. Jane, I'm going to leave you to show everybody how to do this.
I'm going to play with my fabrics now in front of you all.
It's what you do best.
Lovely. Have a lovely time.
Thank you very much.
Lovely
keep
weekend.
in touch.
And I'll catch up with you soon.
And this is how you keep in touch with Jane.
Right, everybody. So I'm going to show you, just to give you an idea of the stitching, looking at the sampler that we've got here, the old one. This was done in, bear with me, 1725. Can you imagine that? 1725. Now, just to show you, this is the same sampler in my hand, which you'll see in a moment. Now, it's quite a lot bigger. You can see that as I hold it up. This was stitched by one of our Guild members. So she'd actually used a magnifying glass, and she had drawn the little sampler in the case there, and then she had translated it using the iStitch program, iStitch 2, which is something you can get from the Cross Stitch Guild. You do need to have a PC, not a Mac. I must remember to say that. Anyway, so this sampler is done in cross stitch on linen. Now, I'm going to show you just really quickly the fabrics that we use for stitching, because I'm aware that it often causes confusion. So I'm just going to do this ever so quickly. Now this one that I've got on the table in front of me now is called, it's actually called Aida, but everybody calls it Aida. So this is a fabric that is made of little squares, visible squares. And the reason for that is when it's woven in blocks. So 4 threads in that direction, 4 threads in that direction. And what it means is that to the novice or somebody who's never seen to stitch before, you can see very clearly where a square is and therefore where you would put a stitch. If I just pop the chart on top, like, let's do it a bit, make it a bit easier for you to see. There we are, look. How about that, look? So you can see that that becomes a stitch and it goes on one of these squares. So for the novice, it's ideal. It's also ideal if you're going to be doing lots of tartan and similar checks, things like that, where you want a very square stitch. Now, if I grab the chart again really quickly, you'll see here, this is the Aida fabric again, and I have stitched in the middle of the fabric that part there. In fact, I have to turn it the other way up, sorry. Now you can see. So you can see that one is translated from the other using these threads. Now, the threads I've got here are what are called stranded cottons. Now, they're often referred to as embroidery silks. Now, they're not silk. They're actually made of cotton. It's a mercerized thread that has a sheen and a twist, and it's embroidery thread, and it's what we tend to use. In the US, it's called floss. Here, we tend to refer to it as stranded cotton. And I'm going to show you how I would start that stitching on a piece of linen, just quickly. So, it doesn't really matter what size your project is, you would start by folding it into 4, like so. Now, on a big project, I would probably do a row of tacking stitches so that I could clearly see where my middle is. Now, let's just see. I'm going to take this green here. So I'll just grab one off the end of here and I'll show you how we start. Right, I obviously haven't got a needle in my mouth because it would be a ridiculous thing to do. Or am I going to spit on the thread? Because it would be disgusting. And let's see if I can thread this needle without finding my glasses. Bear with me. Right, I'll use a bigger needle because I'm not going to waste time. The other reason for showing you this little piece of stitching is to show you that when you do cross stitch, it doesn't have to be a picture in a frame. I'm going to show you lots of little things in a minute that have been made. So I'm going to come up in the middle. I'll do this as slowly as I can so you can see. Now what I've done there, just to show you again, is I've folded that one thread in half. You see that? Let me just try again. Yes, I've got the loop on the end there on my thumb. Yeah, that's it, perfect. Now, I'm going to bring the needle up on this lovely piece of, this is washed unbleached linen. I'm going to cross 2 fabric threads, like so, turn over, and pass the needle through the loop on the back, like so. So that means you've got no spaghetti going on at the back. And this is how, whoops, that's how big your stitches are going to be. So I'm making the point here that although I personally love to work with linen, and I wear it, you know, my curtains are made of it, the sofas are covered in it, and as I've said on a number of occasions before, I spend most of the year wandering around clutching a steam iron. That's how the cross stitches are formed, and I tend to work in 2 journeys, like so. There we go. and then go back and cover them. And that's how cross stitches worked on linen, like so. So just to make the point then, the designs will be the same size. And if I just go in my little trolley here, I'll produce this to prove it. This is just a little cutout that I bought just to show you. There's a design worked on the Aida material, and there's the same design worked on the linen. It's even weave linen. This means that the same number of threads go up and down and side to side. Now on the old sampler that we looked at, that won't have been even weave, and it's quite possible that you would end up with your rabbit looking like the hare, because sometimes fabrics are 40 one way and 60 the other, and some people are batty enough to work on it as well. So that's the two main fabrics. The even weave means that it doesn't mean that it hasn't got any bumps. It just means that the fabric is the same number of threads in both directions. And the Aida fabric is woven in blocks, making it easier for you to see. So if I just pass that across just for a second, and then I'm going to just show you this really quickly. This is it goes on to prove yet again that the Cross Stitch Guild is absolutely committed to working with blank fabric and a needlework chart, but that it's not just cross stitch. This is the new stitch book, which is available from the Cross Stitch Guild. And all of these stitches, of which there are 120 odd, are able to be worked on linen. That's the disadvantage of the Aida material, because you are somewhat stuck. Sometimes you can't make the stitch because you haven't enough threads. Just to give you some examples then of stitching worked on linen, because as I said, linen is my first love. I'm going to just blind you with this lot. Now then, this one in my hand was done as part of a celebration of the Monet's garden in Giverny. And some of you will already be shuddering, because round the top here are masses of French knots. There's often a cry of anguish or exultation, actually, at shows where I actually spend a little time showing people how to make this stitch, which I'm going to do in a second. So these are amassed French knots to give us the feeling of the wisteria over the great lily ponds. This is a piece of hardhanger from our new hardhanger book, again available from CSG headquarters. This is called a sweetie bag. It's much bigger than the original Tudor ones. The Tudor ones were probably a quarter of the size, but they'd be embroidered in gold and silver and beads, and then would be carrying herbs and spices that you could pop up to your nose as you walk down the street because of the problems of sanitation, etc. And sometimes they would have a hymn book or a prayer book inside as well. This is a good example of Cross Stitch Guild stuff. So you've got the flower book, which again is a kit. It started off as a project for Guild members, and the idea was that it was a class over a number of months. So you'd learn the different techniques. You can see here we've got some quite interesting different stitches using different threads. I mentioned stranded cotton to you just now. These are in fact space dyed or hand painted silk, which again adds dimension and very attractive content to your work. This is black work, originally or often referred to as Holbein stitch. This is a CC work from Italy, where the design is left blank and the background is stitched. This is hardhanger, which I've just mentioned, taken from the Embroideries of Norway. This is pattern darning. Now that's not seen as much these days. I'm afraid all our clothes are regarded as fairly disposable, aren't they? But there was a time when darning was a very important part of usually a woman's work. And I have seen when a pattern darning is done properly, a skirt, a very expensive skirt of dogtooth tweed, actually being replicated by the darn so that it was invisible from the front. This is a hem-stitch square, often seen on early samplers. This is a hem-stitch band with some beads popped in, and this is pulled work here on the back. So these are really to show you that the cross-stitch guild isn't about cross-stitch, it's about counted embroidery. And I must just mention that there's no entry level. You know, you only have to love to stitch, and then you're very welcome to join us. Now I'll just show you a French knot before I forget, because I have had many notes to this effect. So let's grab a piece of thread from here. And I'll just give you a quick version of the French knot. Bear with me when I get in a terrible tangle. There we go. So this is another little tip actually. When you get your embroidery threads, they are generally in sixes. And don't attempt to part them like so, because you will get a knot halfway down. Just pull out from one end and you'll get a perfectly reasonable thread. Now, can I find the needle I just was using, I wonder? Let's have a look. Somewhere here. Yes, well, I'll have to thread this one. It's a beast. Done it. Good. Right, so again, I've threaded my needle with one strand folded double. It's a wonderful way of starting. I mean, obviously it only works if you're working with an even number of threads. And if you were using the space-dyed silk that I just mentioned, you'd have to be very careful because you can disrupt the colours. You might need to, almost certainly will need to take two lengths and realign them. Otherwise you get the colours in the wrong places on the thread. Anyway, I'm going to just anchor this on this piece of linen by going up and down and passing it through the loop on the back, like so. Now you'll notice I'm using a gold-plated needle. I never use anything else. And I won't go on and on about how I discovered them, but they are for knots, they're the way forward. So I've got my thread coming out there, and I'm going to wrap the point twice, post it in the adjacent space next to my thread, and pull. So I've supported it. I haven't done this very well, so I'm going to do you a few. Let's try that again. Do it over here. So let's try that. So we go round the point twice. Don't try to get it off the needle. Pop the needle in. What we've done is we've stolen a stitch from the embroideries. And when you're working with fine linen and a sharp needle, you can go up and down the same hole when you create your stitch. And that's often what's confused people when they're counting, because we work with a blunt needle, because we're not piercing the fabric, we're separating the threads. So that's why I go in the next door hole. And I always hang on to that last thread just till the last minute. There you are. Let's do another one. And I can show you another little knot as well, which some people find easier. Round twice. Post the point. I'm holding it with a finger underneath and pull through and let go at the last minute. There you are. So obviously if you're doing a mass of them in a pattern, you don't even need to count. You're just going to sit there and ch-ch-ch-ch. I'll show you another one that's quite useful. This is a colonial knot. So I've got the fabric on my table, just lying flat. You notice that I'm not using a frame or hoop. Now that's personal. I'm a bit of a philistine. Bear with me a minute. I'm just going to make that twirl. That's it. What I'm trying to do is, I don't like my things in a wooden frame. I like to work with in my hand, and I do. But if you prefer to work with a frame or hoop, please do. Anyway, I'm going to make a colonial knot. So what I'm going to do is do a figure of 8. Go so, and through. So I'll do that again. So a colonial knot, which you could use instead of French, is like so. And sometimes, if you're working a mass of them, that's a little easier to do. Right, let me just set these on one side for a minute and squish everything down. And I'm just going to show you a technique that I think you might find really useful. So how to mount and frame a piece of your embroidery. Now, framing is, as you know, all of you, it is very costly. And not all framers know how to mount embroidery. I have caught one using Bostik. Couldn't believe it. So I'm going to show you my way. Now, I'm not saying this is the way. I'm showing you my way. With 2 options attached to it, really. So this frame was purchased from a well-known high street warehouse type shop. Very simple, got some clips in it. I've taken everything out. I used the glass in the frame to cut a piece of, very tatty actually. This is what they call foam core. And basically it's 2 pieces of card with a small amount of polystyrene foam. You can just about see it. You can obviously use acid-free mount board if you want to, but this is really helpful. I've covered it with a little piece of Warm and Natural, but it's the sort of flannel that quilters use a lot. Lovely and soft. I cut out and I've just stuck it onto there with a little bit of double-sided tape. So I'm going to show you how I stretch this, and then we'll have the argument about how you finish them. So with a lot more time, I would be measuring like mad, which I'm not going to do because we won't have time, but I'm going to have a go at this. Just let me get the first pins in, and then I can explain. What I'm going to do is use my pins, and I'm going to pass them into that polystyrene. And I'll show you what I'm doing in a second. If I can just get a couple in. Right, so here we go. So I've got the piece of foam core, a bit of padding. I always pad. You can use polyester wadding. It's inert, it doesn't cause any damage. Often it's a bit puffy. It depends what the project's going to look like at the end. I like something that's not too puffed up. And what I'm doing is I'm going to put the pins round the piece of stitching, like so. But please note, I'm actually following the line of the fabric, the thread, like so. And then I'm going to do this side, so I think I'm about right there. As I said, if you were mounting a piece of embroidery and you'd allow yourself a bit more time, and I would certainly count the threads. When I'm estimating here, I would physically count the threads there and make sure the same number were there. Top and bottom's less crucial because generally we would have a slightly deeper margin at the bottom than the top anyway. Just so I can get to show you this properly in the time that we've got. I'm going to do this by eye and keep my fingers crossed that we're somewhere about right. So glass-headed pins or plastic-headed pins, save your fingers. And remember that it isn't done until it's all done. So don't worry about how it appears while I'm doing it, because it'll be the last pin that goes in that sorts it out. Obviously I've checked that my piece of foam core fits the frame. Bear with me. So I'm going to keep going as fast as it's safe to do. And then it's going to be how we finish it off. Now if I show you on here, this method works for your embroidery. For this piece, my ancient sampler, I did this process to the piece of linen, not to the sampler. I wasn't about to stick pins in this precious piece of embroidery, so this embroidery is actually stitched using polyester thread that matches. It's completely inert, it doesn't do any damage, and I've stitched that to a piece of washed linen of a similar hue, and then I've mounted the linen afterwards. And obviously sometimes you want to do that. You might want to put your piece of stitching onto a piece of silk. That can be terribly effective. I don't think I've got anything here that fits the bill, but certainly you could do that. So the same process was done with the ancient sampler reproduction here. This was done on mount board and would then go into a frame. And when this is going to be framed, I'd make sure the glass, if it had glass, didn't touch the embroidery. On one course I went on with textile conservation, the glass was removed and a lot of the stitching came with it. So it's a bit like a photograph. You can take it out of an album and it's damaged. Now this is a traditional method of completing. I'll let you look at that while I really quickly do this side. So that's pins going in here. I chose a small one to show you because I know how long it takes. So hopefully we can get round quickly. Obviously, one of the times, this won't be a difficult thing to frame because, of course, it hasn't got a straight edge around it. If you can imagine a sampler or something with a solid line of stitching around the edge, any wobbles when you mount it will be very obvious. And so you need to use lots more pins than I'm using here. Okay, so we're going down there. Just about make it, I think. So while I'm doing this, I'll just remind you a little bit about washing and ironing your embroideries. If I have to wash a piece of embroidery, I try not to, but occasionally, you know, things happen. If I have to wash a piece of embroidery, I wash it in mild fairy liquid. I know I've mentioned fairy liquid, but there we are, that's what I use. Hand wash in the sink, but not until I have done a colour fastness test. Now that's where it's really worth just taking a second, put your piece of stitching face down on a flat surface, and then, just bear with me, then using a white tissue that you've wet and squeezed out, what you need to do is press on the back of the embroidery, particularly if you've used any unusual threads, space dyed thread, a very bright Christmas red. Sometimes they let us down. The way that the dyeing and the what's the word I'm looking for? The way they have to protect the environment, etc. And when dyes are being used for threads and so on, some of the procedures that used to be used can't be anymore. And there's no doubt that a couple of the Christmas reds available are sometimes suspect. So I would always check a red. I would go on the back and check a dark green. And then if there's any trace of the colour on your tissue, don't wash it. All right? Right, if you were going to wash it, wring it out in a towel, dry it naturally, and then press on an ironing board, 4 layers of bath towel on your ironing board and a steam iron. Again, if you wouldn't use a steam iron unless you tested for colour fastness first. Now, so the traditional way of doing this now is lacing. And you have a bobbin of lace of cotton, and you're going backwards and forwards like so in both directions. That is the traditional way. Now, I'm going to cheat, and I can hear the aghast as you're watching. A little bit of double-sided tape down there. I'm going to have to use these scissors because I didn't bring any others with me. Get the tape off. Pull, and you actually almost lift the little pins a bit. Pull and stick. A little bit of brown tape. Oh, I've actually managed to bleed on it. There you are. There's another thing to remind you, is that did you know that your own spit will remove a blood stain? So I'll try not to bleed on it anymore. There we go. I haven't actually damaged the stitching, you'll be pleased to hear. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, magic hands, that's excellent. There we go. And then I'm going to snip off the corners, like so. There you are. So while I'm doing this, just remind you all of the free draw. If you'd like to pop onto the Cross Stitch Guild website, obviously you'll see lots of things that I've had here, lots of things to look at. Go to Stitch Basics if you're not sure about some of the things I've done. If you go to Stitch Basics on the Cross Stitch Guild website, there are videos of me stitching, talking about Aida, talking about linen, all free to view, so feel free to go there. And if you want to have the Guild free phone number, I'll be able to give you that in just a minute. There we go. And as I said earlier, my own small site will be doing something, hopefully by March 2020. So I've snipped a corner off. So there'll be £100 of e-vouchers for some lucky person who just registers to receive the Cross Stitch Guild newsletter. It's only once a month, comes down through your computer, and Andrew finds all sorts of interesting things to tell you, as well as obviously mentioning anything new from the Guild itself. I'm just going to have time to show you this, I think. Right, when it's stuck down like so, I remove all the pins, but not before. So the same thing would apply if you were lacing. There we are. And remember that the Cross Stitch Guild will be at the Stitch Festival in March, sorry, end of February. Right, so there's our piece of stitching. Pop it in. done. So yes, the end of March, last weekend in March, the Cross Stitch Guild and myself, for some of the time certainly, we will be at the Design Centre at Islington for a brand new show, which is taken over from the Olympia show, which many of you will be familiar with. And we'll be there to show you all this stuff. And obviously Andrew will have loads of things to show you, things from the Guild itself. And that really is all for today. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.